The lonely millionaire CEO sat alone at the cafe until a little girl walked up and said, "Are you okay, sir?" The cafe sat quietly on a sleepy corner, nestled between weathered brick buildings and flower shops with faded signs. Rain from the night before still clung to the awning, dripping slowly onto the sidewalk. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of roasted coffee and sugar, muffled conversation filling the space. Rowan Thorne sat alone by the window, a cooling espresso untouched beside him. The thin film on its surface marked how long he'd been there. He stared through the glass, not at anything in particular, his reflection faint, a sharp suit, pressed collar, and eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. Perfect on the outside, hollow on the inside. 2 days ago, he had buried his mother. The last person who ever asked him, "Are you happy?" The only one who saw him without expectation. At the funeral they'd said, "She'd be proud of you." As if that was what mattered. As if pride could replace the voice he now missed more than he could bear. The cafe door opened with a soft chime. Rowan's gaze flicked toward the sound, more reflex than interest. A group of college students entered, laughing. The barista waved. And like always, the room's attention shifted, even briefly, toward him. Some recognized him. Rowan Thorne, billionaire CEO, the tech genius behind Thorne Medical. Whispers followed, stolen glances, admiration mixed with distance. But none of it meant anything. He looked back at the cup, trying to stay grounded. 10 more minutes, he told himself. It was too early to go home, too late to return to work, and the silence in his penthouse was deafening. Then, soft footsteps, small, uneven. He glanced up. A little girl, maybe 3, stood beside his table. She wore a pink dress that fluttered around her knees, one hand holding a half-eaten cookie. Her blonde curls were slightly messy, her round face framed by innocence. Big gray-blue eyes blinked up at him. She didn't smile or shy away, just tilted her head and asked, clear and calm, "Are you okay, sir?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that, not genuinely, in weeks, months, maybe. The words fell like a gentle pebble into the still water of his grief, sending ripples he didn't expect. He blinked, and for the first time in weeks, a small sound escaped him, part laugh, part sigh. She looked at him, serious now. "You don't look okay," she added quietly, as if sharing something just for him. "My mom says when people don't talk, they're sad inside." He cleared his throat. "Your mom sounds very wise." "She makes cookies," the girl said matter-of-factly. "Cookies help everything." That almost made him laugh again. He nodded. "I'll remember that." From across the cafe, a voice called out, light and slightly anxious. "Mila, sweetheart, come here." The girl, Mila, turned, but before she left, she looked back one more time, her brow furrowed with concern. "You should have a cookie, sir. It'll help." And then she was gone, skipping back to her mother, who crouched to whisper something before glancing up at Rowan. She was young, mid-20s, blonde like her daughter, with a tired elegance about her. She gave him an apologetic smile, soft and unsure. He nodded slightly to show it was okay. She turned back toward the counter, her hand resting on Mila's shoulder. The cafe's noise resumed, mugs clinking, low conversation. But something had shifted. Rowan looked down at his espresso, then at the empty chair across from him. It had been just another seat before. Now, it held a trace of something else, something warm. That girl had no idea who he was, no titles, no reputation. She saw a man alone and asked the one question he hadn't heard in far too long. "Are you okay, sir?" The words echoed gently in his mind. Rowan let out a breath, not the sigh of a CEO calculating his next move, but of a man, remembering something he'd lost. He glanced back at the window. The street outside looked the same, but not quite as gray. His lips curved, not fully, just a flicker, but it was real. The first smile in weeks, and for reasons he didn't yet understand, It stayed. The moment Mila returned to her seat, Elara Quinn hurried over, clearly flustered. Her blonde hair was clipped back, apron lightly dusted with flour, evidence of a long morning at the counter. She crouched beside her daughter, whispered something gently, then rose to face Rowan. "I'm really sorry," she said quickly. She doesn't usually talk to strangers. Rowan looked up. His face was unreadable, but his voice came steady. "It's all right." Elara hesitated. She shifted slightly, uncertain if she should say more or step away. He had the air of someone important, his suit, his quiet composure, the subtle way others in the cafe noticed him without saying a word. But it was the weight behind his eyes that caught her off guard. Not power, not confidence, sadness. She gave a polite nod and turned. Rowan's gaze followed her. Not just the child who'd spoken to him like no one had in years, but the woman who came after her, who offered no charm, no recognition, no attempt to impress. Just honesty and a quiet, nervous grace. Back at their table, Mila was talking animatedly, showing Elara a drawing she'd made earlier. Rowan couldn't hear the words, but the tone was clear, something about pastries shaped like animals, a cat behind the shop, and a dream involving a marshmallow. The kind of childhood joy that felt untouched by the world. Mila glanced back at Rowan and said something. Elara blushed faintly and hushed her. Whatever it was, he couldn't help but smile just a little. Then something unexpected happened. As Elara passed behind the counter, she slowed near a small shelf tucked behind the register. She reached into a glass jar that didn't seem meant for display. From it, she pulled a small round cookie, slightly uneven, plainly wrapped. She placed it on a tiny ceramic plate, hesitated, then walked it over to Rowan's table. Without ceremony, she set the plate down in front of him. "She says this one helps when you're sad," Elara said softly. "She might be right. It works for me sometimes." And with that, she turned and walked away. Rowan stared at the plate. It was a humble cookie, homemade, imperfect at the edges. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and vanilla, probably one of the ones made for kids, lower sugar, soft in the middle, baked without much fuss. But to Rowan, it wasn't just a cookie. It wasn't a gift for his title. It wasn't polite networking. It wasn't obligation wrapped in sugar. It was kindness, offered plainly, gently, with no strings. He glanced back across the cafe. Elara was busy now, refilling jars, pretending not to notice him. Mila was scribbling something on a napkin with a pink crayon, tongue peeking out in concentration. Rowan didn't eat the cookie right away. He simply held the plate, letting the warmth of the ceramic spread through his fingers. It wasn't just the cookie that comforted him. It was the fact that someone, for once, had thought about what he might need, not what he could offer. No one had done that since his mother. Not the advisors who'd shaken his hand at the funeral. Not the friends who texted, "Thinking of you," with no follow-up. Everyone around him assumed he would carry on, invulnerable. But this woman, Elara, had walked over and placed a cookie in front of him because her daughter said it helped, because maybe she knew what it meant to carry more than you could say. His gaze drifted once more to her. Maybe she saw something real in me, not the CEO, just me. The thought didn't unsettle him. It didn't crack his composure. It comforted him. And for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel quite so invisible. Rowan Thorne returned to the cafe the next morning, and the next, and the next. He never said much. Just came in, ordered the same black coffee, and sat at the same corner table, close enough to hear Mila's cheerful voice echo through the room, but far enough to remain unnoticed by most. But not by Mila. Every day, the little girl would wave at him like they were old friends. Sometimes she'd bring him crayon drawings of cats, stars, or smiling suns, always signed, "For Mr. Coffee Man." Rowan never corrected her. He kept every drawing, quietly, folded into his wallet as if they mattered more than the business cards he handed out daily. At first, Elara remained politely distant. She was kind, not cold, and treated him no differently than any other customer. But over time, She started to notice the small things, like how Rowan would gently move a customer's chair to clear her path when she was juggling hot plates and Mila tugging at her apron. He never said anything, didn't look for credit, just made space for her, silently. And Alara began to see not just a man in a tailored suit, but someone who noticed more than he let on. On a rainy Thursday, the cafe was quieter than usual. Gray clouds hovered low, the streets slick with mist. Alara was in the back, finishing a cake order. Mila played out front on the stone porch, spinning under fairy lights in her pink dress. Then came the sound. A soft thud, a startled cry. Rowan was already on his feet. In a few quick strides, he was outside. Mila sat on the wet stone, palms scraped, her dress speckled with dirt. Her eyes brimmed with tears. Rowan knelt beside her, wordless. He pulled a white handkerchief from his coat and gently wiped her hands. His movements were calm, careful. Then, from his wallet, he drew out a small metallic sticker, gold, shaped like a star. He held it out. "Only the bravest kids get this," he said quietly. "Crying's okay, but brave ones always get back up." Mila sniffled, looked at him with solemn eyes, and nodded. She took the sticker, then wrapped her arms tightly around his neck. That was when Alara stepped out. She stopped in the doorway, cake box in hand, eyes fixed on the man holding her daughter like she was something fragile and important. Rowan didn't notice her at first. His attention was all on Mila, and when he did glance up, his eyes, usually guarded, held something unspoken, something gentle. Back inside, Rowan returned to his table. A few minutes later, Alara approached with a cup of hot cocoa and set it down in front of him. She said nothing, but beside the cup, she placed a small cloth bundle. Inside, a single homemade cookie, uneven, warm, fragrant. Tucked under it was a handwritten note. "Mila says you're part of our kind friend club now. We start with cookies." Underneath was a crooked little drawing, Mila in her pink dress, Alara with her yellow hair, and a tall man with a gold star on his chest and a coffee cup in hand. Rowan stared at it longer than he meant to. Then, for the first time in years, something close to a smile tugged at his lips. Not the rehearsed kind from meetings, something quieter, real. He slipped the note into his wallet, right next to Mila's other drawings. That night, the city glowed beneath Rowan's penthouse, but inside, everything felt still, hollow. He walked through the quiet space, past gleaming furniture and untouched art. The silence, once his refuge, now weighed heavier than ever. In his study, he opened a drawer, Rolex, cufflinks, titanium business card holder all gleamed under soft light. But his hand passed them. Instead, he reached for the paper bundle. The drawing, the note. He held them in his palms, elbows resting on the desk, head bowed, breath shallow. And then a quiet thought slipped through the quiet. How did a pink dress and a cookie do more than a boardroom ever could? The weather had turned cooler. Early autumn leaves rustled along the cafe's windowsills, and the sunlight slipped in softer now, gentler, like everything in Rowan's world since Mila and Alara appeared. By now, Rowan's presence had become part of the cafe's quiet rhythm. Never loud, never disruptive, just steady. Sometimes he'd arrive in the early morning, catching Alara as she opened the shutters, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. Other times, it was late afternoon, when Mila was coloring napkins and Alara had flour on her sleeve. But always, Rowan chose the table closest to the counter, always facing them. One morning, while waiting for his coffee, Rowan finally spoke, not to Mila, but to Alara, who was wiping down the counter. "My mother used to ask me a question," he said quietly. "Even after I became CEO, she'd still ask, 'Are you happy?'" Alara looked up, hands stilling on the cloth. She didn't care about the stock price, never asked about company numbers, just that one thing. There was a pause. Rowan's hand toyed with a sugar packet he never opened. The grief in his voice needed no further explanation. Alara didn't rush to answer. She simply nodded. Somehow, that was enough. Days later, The conversation deepened. They were closing together one evening. Mila had fallen asleep in the corner booth, a picture book resting on her chest. The radio played something slow and jazzy in the background. Elara glanced at her daughter, then at Rowan. Her voice came unprompted. "I almost gave her up," she said. Rowan turned slightly, listening. "Not forever," Elara clarified. "Just for a while. When I found out I was pregnant, my fiancé said he wasn't ready. Walked out. I was 23, broke, working double shifts." Rowan didn't speak. He just listened. I kept thinking maybe Mila deserved more. 2 parents, stability, someone better than me. But the moment I saw her, I knew. I could give up everything, except her. Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes gleamed. She looked over at Mila, then back at Rowan. "I don't hate him," she added. "I just hate that she'll never know what it's like to have 2 parents who stayed." A long silence followed. Not heavy, just real. Rowan finally said, "She has more than most. She has you." Elara met his gaze. Something passed between them, unspoken, but understood. Later that week, it happened. It was a Friday evening. The cafe buzzed with customers, cups clinking, the espresso machine hissing. A group of well-dressed patrons had arrived, loud, entitled. A birthday party, apparently. Elara remained calm, composed, until one of them sneered, "Is this a daycare or a bakery?" loud enough for others to hear. Elara's smile faltered. Moments later, she disappeared into the back. Rowan, standing by the register, noticed. Without hesitation, he followed. He slipped through the staff door and found her in the dim hallway beside the supply closet, seated on an overturned crate. Her head was bowed, hands wiping at her eyes quickly. She looked up, startled to see him. He didn't speak, just grabbed a water bottle from a nearby crate and set it beside her. Then, gently, he reached into his coat pocket and handed her a clean napkin. Elara took both. Her eyes were tired, red-rimmed, but thankful. Rowan sat down opposite her, knees drawn up, arms draped loosely over them. For a moment, they just sat in silence, breathing the same air. Finally, Rowan spoke. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he said quietly. "Not here, not with me." Elara didn't respond. She didn't need to. In that cramped hallway, beneath the hum of the fluorescent light and the scent of cinnamon and coffee grounds, something softened between them. They were 2 people shaped by pain, by responsibilities too big and too soon, by people who left. But here, just for a moment, they weren't carrying it alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of something healing. The change was slow, so subtle in fact, that Elara almost didn't notice it happening. But the signs were there, like quiet ripples on the surface of still water. One rainy morning, she arrived at the cafe soaked through her sleeves, only to find a dark green umbrella propped by the back door. No note, no message, just a silent gesture. She glanced at Rowan's usual seat through the window. He was already there, sipping his espresso, eyes on the rain. Another time, she caught him buying one of Mila's favorite cookies from the display, a ginger honey swirl that the girl rarely asked for by name but always lit up at the sight of. No one had told him. No one needed to. Little things, quiet things, thoughtful in a way that had nothing to do with wealth or charm. For someone like Rowan Thorne, CEO, multimillionaire, a man who once operated on precise calculations and careful detachment, these gestures weren't just kind. They were deeply personal, intentional. And Elara felt it, all of it. There were moments now when their eyes would meet across the room, and she would feel something stir in her chest that she hadn't let herself feel in years. A kind of nervous warmth, a flutter she tried to ignore. But Mila, in all her innocent wisdom, never ignored anything. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. The cafe had been busy all morning, and Elara was midway through a double shift. Mila, curled up in her corner seat with a blanket and storybooks, had been unusually quiet. Elara had chalked it up to a skipped nap. But by mid-afternoon, her daughter's cheeks flushed with a pink that was not from play. She was burning up. "Mila," Elara whispered, kneeling beside her and brushing her damp bangs aside. The little girl whimpered and leaned into her mother's chest. Her skin was hot. Oh no. She glanced around the cafe. No one else on shift could leave. The owner wouldn't be back until evening. Panic began to rise in her chest. She needed to get Mila to urgent care, but she couldn't leave the cafe unattended. Rowan stood up from his table. His gaze had already found hers before she could even ask. "I'll take you," he said, without hesitation. Elara looked torn. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said gently. "Let me drive you." A few minutes later, they were in his car, sleek, silent, the scent of leather and pine filling the air. Elara cradled Mila in the back seat, whispering softly, trying to calm her. Rowan drove with one hand steady on the wheel, glancing at the rearview mirror every few seconds. Halfway through the ride, Mila stirred. She blinked up groggily at Rowan's reflection and mumbled, "You're my favorite grown-up." Rowan's eyes widened briefly in the mirror, his mouth opening just slightly, as if unsure how to respond. Elara, holding Mila close, felt something shift in her chest. He didn't laugh, didn't deflect. Instead, his voice softened. "That's a pretty big title, Mila." The girl nodded sleepily. "You give cookies, and stars, and you help my mommy." Elara blinked hard, trying to keep tears from escaping. She looked toward Rowan, his profile lit by the late afternoon sun cutting through the windshield. He wasn't polished in that moment. Not the flawless executive. Just a man, with careful hands, gentle instincts, and a heart that had learned how to be soft again. She saw him not as the CEO of a company, but as a man who had remembered the exact cookie her daughter liked, who kept star stickers in his wallet, who gave umbrellas and silence instead of flowers and compliments. Her breath caught. She had spent so long believing love came wrapped in grand gestures or big promises. But here it was, quiet, unspoken, resting in the space between small kindnesses and Mila's sleepy declarations. And in that car, with the city blurring past the windows and her daughter curled up safely beside her, Elara realized. She wasn't afraid of Rowan Thorne anymore. She was beginning to fall. The peace they had found, quiet, fragile, and blooming, shattered in a single afternoon. It started with a letter. A thick envelope slid under Elara's apartment door, stamped with a law firm's logo. Inside was a formal petition for custody, and a name she had hoped never to see again. Callan Price. Her stomach turned. She hadn't heard from him since he walked out, months before Mila was born. The same man who once whispered forever and vanished when forever became inconvenient. Now, years later, he had returned, not with regret, not with apology, but with cold threats wrapped in legal language. He wanted joint custody, or full custody, if she didn't comply. With the petition came a note, written in quick, cruel ink. "Take the settlement. Walk away, or I'll see you in court." Elara sat at the kitchen table, the papers trembling in her hands. Mila napped in the next room, safe in a world of pink blankets and bedtime stories, unaware of the threat looming just outside that door. Elara didn't sleep that night. Fear pressed against her chest like a weight she couldn't lift. But she said nothing to Rowan. Not that day, not the one after. He had already done too much. He had a reputation to protect, a business to run, and a life of expectations she couldn't burden. So, she smiled. She worked. She let Mila twirl in her sparkly sneakers and talk about her drawings, pretending the ground hadn't opened beneath her feet. But Rowan noticed. He saw the difference in her posture, the tightness in her laugh. He watched her hands tremble when she poured coffee, her eyes no longer lifted when someone said her name. He didn't ask. Not at first. Then one late afternoon, passing the playground near the cafe, he saw her, Elara, alone on a bench, face in her hands. Her shoulders trembled with silent sobs. She thought no one was watching. Rowan stood for a long moment, then walked over. Quiet footsteps, no fanfare. He sat beside her, offering a handkerchief and a bottle of water. Elara looked up, startled. Her mascara had smudged, and her eyes were red. "I'm fine," she said automatically. Rowan didn't flinch. He didn't speak, just sat beside her, solid and silent. "You don't have to be," he said softly. She couldn't answer. Instead, she clutched the water, blinking away tears, and let the silence say what she couldn't. "I'm scared. I'm tired. I don't know what to do." That night, Rowan made a call. The next morning, a woman rang Alara's doorbell, sharp suit, calm smile. "I'm a family attorney," she said. "I'm here on behalf of someone who believes in you. You owe nothing." Alara stared, papers still clutched in her hand. She didn't ask who sent her. She already knew. That afternoon, she found Rowan at the cafe. Same corner table, same quiet focus. She approached with a muffin she'd meant to give him earlier. "You did this," she said. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "I just gave you a better sword," he replied. "You'll still be the one swinging it." "I didn't want to bother you," she said. "You didn't." His voice was steady. "But you're not fighting this alone." She hesitated, the weight of fear still clinging to her. "I'm afraid." He nodded slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "You protect her," he said. "Let me protect you, even just a little." There was no grand promise, no dramatic vow. Just that. A quiet offer of safety, of standing beside her, not to lead, not to fix, but to stay. And in that moment, something solid formed between them. Not obligation, not rescue, but trust. And for the first time in a long time, Alara felt what it meant to have someone in her corner, not because they had to, but because they chose to. Because to Rowan, she wasn't a problem to solve or a distraction from success. She was a woman worth standing beside. The truth came quietly, but it didn't go unnoticed. Alara had always been perceptive, even when tired. Even when her life felt like it was stitched together with coffee, lullabies, and the quiet strength of a mother who refused to fall apart. She noticed the timing first, the lawyer who arrived just when she was about to give in. The way the woman spoke, not like someone hired by chance, but someone delivering on a silent promise. And then the final piece. A note tucked into Mila's coat pocket after a quick visit to the bookstore with Rowan. The handwriting was his. The message, simple. "For the bravest girl I know, and the strongest woman." No name, no signature. But Alara didn't need one. The next morning she found him at the cafe, seated by the window, a book open but unread. She walked over and placed a small paper bag beside his cup. "Apple cinnamon. Still warm," she said, steady but direct. Rowan looked up. A flicker of a smile appeared until he caught the seriousness in her eyes. He closed the book. "You helped me," she said. "The lawyer, the letter, that note." He didn't deny it. "Why didn't you tell me?" Rowan met her gaze. "Because I didn't want it to feel like I was stepping in to fix something you could already handle. And you can. You did." "Then why?" she asked again, softer now. He paused, then quietly. "It's not charity. I care, not just about Mila, about you." Her breath hitched. No flowers, no grand gestures, just words, steady, unafraid. She didn't speak, not right away. Her fingers toyed with her sleeve. Then, slowly, she sat down across from him and reached out. Her fingertips brushed his knuckles. A light, deliberate touch. It was the first time she touched him without Mila between them, the first time it meant something more. Rowan turned his palm, gently holding her hand in return. That evening, he offered to take them for a walk. The air was crisp. Autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet as they strolled through quiet streets. Mila held Rowan's hand, pointing out pumpkins and giggling at squirrels darting past. By the time they returned near the cafe, Mila was nearly asleep. Rowan lifted her easily, her arms limp as she nestled her head on his shoulder. Alara walked beside him, saying nothing. There was something about the way he carried her daughter, effortless, secure, like it had never been a question, like it had always belonged to him. The street lamps blinked on, casting a soft amber glow. Rowan shifted his coat to cover Mila better, his free hand brushing against Ilara's as they walked. Then Ilara stopped. He turned to her, eyebrows raised. "You okay?" She nodded, her eyes glistened. "I used to think," she began, voice trembling, "I'd never be someone's home, that I wasn't soft enough, or whole enough, that no one would ever stay." He didn't respond, he just looked at her, really looked. She glanced from his face to the sleeping child in his arms. Then, so softly it barely broke the silence, she whispered, "But maybe you are." They stood there for a long moment, 3 quiet figures beneath the street lamp. One asleep, one remembering, one just beginning to believe. Sometimes, love doesn't announce itself with thunder. Sometimes, it simply stays. The day of the grand opening arrived beneath a soft autumn sky. Sunlight filtered through amber leaves lining the sidewalk outside the new public library. But this wasn't just another corporate project. Not to Rowan. Not this time. The library stood tall in the heart of the neighborhood, its modern design softened by warm wood accents, cozy reading corners, and shelves already filled with donated books. Near the entrance, a plaque gleamed. "A place to begin again," sponsored by Thorne Medical Foundation. Families gathered, children laughing, neighbors chatting. Few realized the man behind it all had once sat alone in a cafe nearby, unnoticed. Rowan stood near the front, adjusting his sleeves as a local official wrapped up a brief speech. From the edge of the stage, Ilara watched, one hand resting on Mila's shoulder. The little girl wore her favorite pink dress, twirling in place as she waited. As the applause faded, Rowan stepped up to the microphone. His voice was calm, steady, but something in his eyes had softened. "I built this place with the hope that no one would feel alone between these walls, that anyone, no matter their story, could find comfort, joy, or even just a moment of peace here." He looked out over the crowd, then down at Mila. "Sometimes, the ones who show us how to rebuild aren't who we expect." He gestured gently. Mila's eyes lit up, and she scampered across the stage toward him. Rowan knelt and pulled something from his coat pocket, a bracelet, pale rose-colored beads with a silver heart charm. He fastened it around her tiny wrist. "This," he said softly, "is a promise that you'll always have me, even when things are scary or confusing, even when it feels like no one sees you, I will." Mila beamed and kissed his cheek. The crowd smiled and laughed quietly. Then Rowan turned to Ilara. She hadn't moved. Her hand was over her mouth, eyes glistening with emotion. He stepped toward her. "You walked into my life quietly," he said, voice low and full. "But you stayed loudly, not because I asked, not because of who I am. You stayed because you cared, because you saw someone no one else saw." He reached for her hands. "Will you walk the rest of it with me?" There was no hesitation, no doubt. Only a quiet nod, and then tears. She wrapped her arms around him, and he held her close, careful not to disturb the now sleeping child against his shoulder. Applause rippled across the crowd, but neither of them seemed to hear it. Later, after the speeches and smiles faded, Rowan turned to her and simply said, "Let's go home." Not to the penthouse, not to his old world, but back to the cafe, back to where it all began. The evening sky had turned dusky blue as the 3 of them strolled down the sidewalk, Mila resting comfortably in Rowan's arms, Ilara walking close beside him. They reached the familiar storefront, lights glowing warmly through the window, just as they had on that first day. A small handwritten sign hung on the door, cheerful red ink across cream cardstock. Ilara's handwriting. "Home is not a place, it's the people who stay." And this time, none of them were walking out alone. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even the strongest need someone to truly see them, then you're already part of the Soul-Stirring Stories family. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the hype button to support the channel. Every click helps us bring more stories of quiet love, real healing, and second chances to life. Because sometimes, all it takes is a little girl in a pink dress to remind us what really matters. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.